Hi, everybody. I am Jessamyn Shams-Lau, your host today. Welcome to It's Not Your Money, real talk about achieving racial equity in philanthropy. So, these slightly irreverent, frank conversations feature leaders challenging the status quo of philanthropy today and demonstrating how we can build a more equitable and just funding landscape, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color founders. So today we might be having quite a nerdy conversation because we're going to be talking about some of my pet enthusiasms in philanthropy, namely governance, stewardship, and legacy. Are you excited? You really should be. And I get to do this. I get to have this conversation with the amazing Will Cordery, founder and principal of Freedom Futures. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I would absolutely love for you to tell our audience just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm super excited to be on this show and on this platform. I've seen some of the other guests that have been on, and I'm fans of many of them. So thank you for including me.
Of
But
course.
yeah, my name is Will Cordery, he, him, pronouns. I am based in Brooklyn, New York, but I am a child of the South, a Black queer man from the South. Being Black, being queer, and being Southern is very much important and central to my identity and the work that I do. Now, in my current iteration of work life, where I get to live out all of my values and identities, I help move money back to communities and back to Southern
Mm-hmm.
communities, back to Black communities, back to liberation work. And personally, I'm a child from Louisville, Kentucky, grew up an only child to a single mom who worked. She worked very hard. My family all worked very hard. And yeah, these are a lot of kind of things that I keep with me, a lot of different experiences. I cut my teeth in organizing in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's definitely very Southern. And the organization I was with called Project South, we did work across the Deep South and the Gulf South. And so all of that was very important to developing my analysis and my politics and my values. And yeah, so just super happy to now be in a place where I can sort of marry these experiences of both
Mm.
work, organizing, and fund redistribution.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing, not just where you're at in life right now, but a lot of what grounds that too. And I suspect some of that will come up later in our conversation again as well. Um, so one of the things that we on this show remind our audience listening through both our title, It's Not Your Money, and this opening question is that when we incorrectly label the money in foundations and donor advised funds as still belonging to the founders, then it's human nature, we also act like the money and the foundation belong to them, which really perpetuates this concentration of power. So our words influence who holds power. And so the question that we've derived from that is, I would love to hear from you, Will. What shift in language would you like to see us make in the funding world that might help us diversify power?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm so glad that you talk about this on your platform, and the fact that the name of this show is "It's Not Your Money," very much centering um, the whole premise, right? Like I actually use that as a frame for all of my clients, right? To move us
Interesting.
beyond thinking of this as just something very charitable or altruistic that they can do. A
Mm,
lot of the work is moving people beyond this framework of donating to
hmm.
returning, right? Like thinking about talking about their origins of their wealth, how they made their money, how they
Yes.
had all of these privileges that enabled them to make and uh, hoard, but also like just gather money and then
Yeah.
turn that over and share it for generations, to have it for generations, all the different
Mhm.
access points and levels up that they had that others didn't have, and made it all possible. But so much of this work of getting people to return money back is to really kind of know the story of how they made their money, and then having the willingness to
Right.
have a critical eye of it. So once we have that space to have the critical conversation as exactly how you made this money, it wasn't just inventing some medical device or having some ingenious idea for textiles. You
Mm.
get to talk about how you benefited from low um, wage labor laws, right? Or
Right.
tax-free benefits and tax breaks and all of these things,
Mm.
right? That made it possible for you to amass a lot of money. But the shift is shifting that framework from donating to returning, right? And the shift
Mm.
from being philanthropic to being responsible and doing something reparative. Um, and that is only made possible when we talk about the origins of wealth and the fact that it's time to, frankly, give it back.
That is a powerful note to end that answer on. And frankly, it's time to give it back. And I couldn't agree more. I love that you are having these conversations in such open and honest and, not in a rude way, but just blunt, like unapologetically. This is history. And so what we are, the narrative that we're often perpetuating about wealth and who holds it and whether they should continue holding it is often very untrue or skewed, or is missing um a big part of the reality of history, and really digging into that and being aware of it really can't lead you to any other conclusion than it is time to give it back. So yes, love that. Oh, like we need to get bumper stickers or t-shirts with that on there. That would be good tagline there, Will. Okay, so when I first came across your work, Will, it was because I was pointed towards one of your articles on NCFP. And in that moment, my little nerdy philanthropy heart fluttered, because I realized we both have a niche and nerdy specific interest in redefining legacy, this big word, legacy, in the philanthropy world. Um, and so, as somebody who is also interested in the concept of legacy in philanthropy, I also found myself wondering, philanthropy is already this weird little corner of the world that most people do not understand, are barely aware of, to begin with, and then to also find yourself interested in a niche area of this niche industry. Legacy within philanthropy. Like, I am intrigued. Like, how did you come to be thinking about, to be focusing on, specifically the idea of legacy and how we redefine it for the benefit of communities of color, really?
Yeah, so I ventured out on my own as a consultant, building out a consultancy to do donor advising in 2020, right? Like
Hmm.
at the height of the triple crisis that we were going through of COVID and the uprisings and then the elections. And so there was a lot of awakening that was happening that year. There were folks reaching
Mm.
out to me. And honestly, I just put myself out there as someone who had a certain level of experience and relationships across both organizing movement spaces as well as philanthropy. But to do this work of being very responsive in real time to what was needed in this country. And so that was in 2020. And I had about a good 2.5 years under my belt when I got to the end of 2022. And something just clicked for me, right? Like after talking to individuals, a lot of high net worth
Hmm.
individuals, and then all after holding space for their families to talk
Mm.
with multiple generations about their wealth, um, much of like the sticky stuff that was hard to move beyond, or to hold this dynamic tension of wanting to move money back, move money in the right way, but also honoring the family story of how they made it, their great grandparents, and all these different things. And these are like dynamic tensions that I think a lot of wealthy people hold. It just kind of clicked for me, like the importance of legacy to people. I think legacy is important to a lot of people, but it's certainly important to folks who have amassed some wealth and have built something, have, seen themselves as building something really amazing and big.
Yep.
It's important to lift up those stories, right? And so what clicked for me is that I don't want to discount any of that story. I don't think that you should. I do think it's important to look at it with a critical eye and talk about what was different then versus what is different now, right? So how can you hold this dynamic tension of honoring your family's legacy, as well as recognizing that the frameworks, the approaches that you may have used to make that money are not the same ones you use to give it back, right? To be philanthropic and do the right thing now. And what if your legacy was actually not just how you started and how you made the money, but how you finish, right? How do you move now, right? Like, it really is a conversation about being full circle, coming back and going forward and saying, this is where we began as a family 3 generations ago. This is where we're headed. This is our goal, our North Star of how we want to end. And so, so at Freedom Futures, we have a program called Aligning Legacy with Liberation, or All Families Coaching, where we walk our clients through a curated experience to have these conversations about their families, about the things that they may not talk about at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? And it might be like, let's just, at base level, we're talking about where we might want to give separately, but we're not talking about the politics or the things behind it, right? You do you, I'll do me. And in this multi-generational space, holding this space where we can talk about things related to race, gender, class, privilege, we can really unearth some of these things and both hold accountable some of that family legacy, as well as move us forward to, like, how do we want to circle out that legacy as a family into something really quite beautiful.
I can see why you are good at your job, right? Because I think really recognizing that there has to be a balance, right? There has to be this combination of not only acknowledging what isn't working in philanthropy, and how the money was made is not necessarily going to work when distributing it towards social good, with also holding the family's story, the family legacy, and really being able to honor that for the trustees as well. And I think sometimes, it's very tempting for those of us who are working in racial justice philanthropy to kind of be like, that doesn't matter. And to forget that we're all human in this. And if we're going to move forward with, changing mindsets and bringing people together, we really have to hold each other as full, whole human beings who, have stories that must continue to be carried with us. We can't just, throw them out because what happened in the past is not necessarily as wholesome as we've been led to believe. So I can imagine that is quite a hard space to hold, though, as well. Yeah. And part of me wonders, kind of, how do you enter those conversations? What kind of reactions are you getting from folks? I mean, obviously they are opting in to the conversation to begin with, so that's a good start. But yeah, what are those conversations like? I imagine they're quite difficult for everyone involved.
They can be. I find, and I kind of referenced this earlier, that like so often families don't have certain conversations as a family. Right? Like
Mm,
they might even be on different lines of the aisle when it comes to electoral
yeah.
politics. So there's oftentimes families just don't have certain conversations. But bringing on folks like us at Freedom Futures creates the conditions to have these conversations. And so you're
Mm,
right, like in part they are opting into this kind of brave, adaptive space. And part of it is very much in real time feeling the discomfort, the like, okay, here we go.
yeah.
Um, but it's quite beautiful and transformative when it happens. And for us, almost with, I think with every single client, we always start with grounding the work and ourselves in values, right? Their
Mm,
personal values as individuals, their values as a family. Um, because when we do that, we find there's a lot more commonality than
mm,
difference. And
I-
it lays the foundation for us to do and talk about the big things, right?
yeah.
If we believe in justice and freedom and quality of life, or all these things, right, that we hold as sacred, I think articulating those, saying them out loud, creates conditions for us to talk about other things and lead us to a very transformative space. And so, yeah, it's really quite beautiful. You know, when I started this work, um, my intent was to really just focus on moving the money out the door.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't know if we really have the time or the capacity to do all this kind of like family relational stuff. But the
Right.
truth is, you have to, right? It's
Mm,
very much connected to moving the money, right? And my team and I talk about this. I always tell them like, um, a marker of success for us is that our clients will move in the right ways long after we're gone,
right.
right? It's one thing to hire us to move one giving strategy with one budget for 1 year or a couple of years, but
Mm,
I
mm,
want to feel that you have been transformed and changed in a way that
mm,
you differently for years to come and for
right.
generations to come, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is like a whole process of creating the conditions, as you said, that allow people to explore and, in some cases, probably redefine their identity. And that's deeply, deeply personal work. And I can imagine that it really is a privilege to be part of, to be privy to that process that I imagine again with some folks is quite quite a huge transformation, and other people is not so huge, but nonetheless still a very personal and perhaps even sacred as an individual to be doing that work together.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, because we've had several breakthroughs in the last few weeks with several clients
Mm,
that have been pushing themselves into conversations with other family members around the stuff around their
huh.
giving. And the thing is, like, their giving really does help root the conversation, right? It helps root
Right.
the transformation. Like, this is where I'm giving to, and sharing it in a way that is uh, not obligatory, not like judgmental, but more like an offering. This is what I'm
Yeah.
doing. I want to share, right? And why it matters to
Mm,
me. It's opening up all this space. And several clients have been holding difficult conversations with families that vehemently had different opinions about the world than they do. And they've been writing us, emailing us, texting us saying, oh my God, this went amazingly well. My dad said this, my mom said this, they want to know more. Like, again, like the things that we were afraid to talk about, and
mm,
understandably so, based on historical conversations and the origins of the
mm,
wealth. people are leaning into brave space and are actually seeing transformative change. And so, yes, I'll stop there.
No, it's incredible to hear. And I think for a lot of our audience, they're potentially listening and deriving hope from what you're describing, Will, because I think a lot of folks who work in the funding world, who work in philanthropy, there are those weeks or those months or those years where you think, are we moving in the right direction? Is anything actually changing, or are we just pushing paper around? Are we just, tweaking tiny policies or like making incremental changes to our grant amounts, when really what we need to be doing is getting into this very real, potentially messy stuff, and perhaps not believing that that's ever possible with their trustees or with their board. And hearing you describe these conversations and the breakthroughs that you are having, that feels very important for folks to hear and to know, okay, we as a field, you as a leader in this field, are developing approaches to how we can have these conversations in a safe, in a respectful, in a beautiful, joyful way as well. And that's the kind of thing that can help people on those, those dark mornings when they're like, do I really want to go to work? Is anything actually changing? You know those days.
Yeah, I do.
So thinking of that, those audience members, foundation staff who are listening and, thinking, well, that's great that Will's figured out how to do that, but, I don't know if my board would ever engage with that type of a conversation. And so I wonder if you have any advice for staff who might be interested in testing the water, who might be interested in, really just taking a gentle foray into this conversation around history of wealth, around legacy, around developing a different identity and relationship with proximity to wealth as well. And I fully understand that, I can only imagine it has taken a long time to develop an approach that is responsible as well, because you are bringing people into very vulnerable places. But just if there's anything that you feel might be appropriate for staff members, something small that they can do and test in their own context, in their own boardrooms, to lay the groundwork.
Mm-hmm. So two things, two experiences. One, we have a client that is a family foundation that has been doing adaptive work and pushing conversations as a family foundation board in deep partnership with the staff for several years, and has had a lot of progress in doing so. The other is that I'm a trustee on a family foundation board, and I'm one of 3 non-family trustees on this family foundation board. And in both of those experiences, I've seen how they've been able to move these respective families forward. I think one bit of advice, and thinking about the one where I'm a trustee, they early on hired staff that had lived experience, right? That had lived experience, that had value, like grounded values and racial justice, that were Black, that were people of color, and we're allowed to bring all that experience in. And I'm not just talking about like mid-level staff, I'm talking about C-suite executive leadership for Black and people of color, right? The folks directing the funding on behalf of the family. And so it already opened the space to have a trusted partner and be in conversation around what's happening, right? And then of course those folks in those senior leadership positions have been very intentional about bringing in movement partners and diverse voices into the conversation in a way that helps shape the family's ideals and experiences, or just understanding. The other thing, so that's one, like who you hire matters.
Yeah.
And two, if you're not fully ready to completely overhaul a funding strategy or throw away the origins of wealth and what you maybe have historically given to. Say it was always direct service to a local community, and that community is not necessarily the most oppressed community, right? Like, but you're hearing that you need to transform with the times and what have you. And you may want to work on diversity. You can hire people to help you, right? Like one of the easiest things that foundations can do, if you can't staff up differently or completely change your trustee makeup, is just hire consultants and outside facilitators to help at least open the space, right? To say the things, to do the thing. And I would say, so with the foundation that we work with in a consulting capacity, they very much did that. They hired a lot of outside folks to come in and move the board along. And it's a very good family. It's a very good family that's really pushed themselves and have been open. And they have remained in lockstep with what really kind of the best practices of philanthropy are. I think that's also kind of important for foundation staff as they think about this, like keeping up with the times in terms of best practices in philanthropy, right? If we're hearing trust-based philanthropy is where we should be going, let's talk about it. If we're hearing about doing away with all like reporting and all these things and why some of these practices can be very harmful. If we're talking about reparative philanthropy and decolonizing wealth, then like, let's talk about it. Like, that's not that it does not exist, because this is the wave. This is the wave, and you want to remain relevant and lean into the best practices. So those would be my tidbits of advice for folks inside of foundations. And look, like we have worked with foundation staff, and yeah, we're often holding space for them to have these types of conversations and do this type of learning, right? To have someone on their side flanking them as they change the environment inside and open up a bit more space. So
amazing. I think we definitely need to put your website in the chat so that folks who might be like, okay, next consultant that we work with, it might just have to be Freedom Futures because I need some of that flanking. That is something we are ready for. And hopefully people will head to your website and find out more about the work that you're doing, Will. And we'll share that in a little bit more detail towards the end of the conversation. But we're fast running out of time, and I want, as we wrap up, to ask you to just for a second put your dreamer hat on and paint as a picture of the future and describe how you think things would look differently for communities of color if we truly redefined legacy and reshaped governance in philanthropy. How do you think things would be different?
Wow. So much of what we have inherited as people through generations of colonization is to erase culture and to erase expressions of culture and celebration and just things that help us heal, help us feel good, bring us together as people, as community, help us love. And I think there's a big undoing we have to do, right? And we have replicated those same kind of harmful practices through philanthropy by its very nature of how philanthropy came to be, through this amassing of wealth and this hoarding of wealth. And so I think what's possible is just creating the conditions so that we can all thrive, right? Like if Black folks and Indigenous folks and people of color thrive, we all thrive. If our cultures are allowed to be, then we are all allowed to be, and we can begin to heal. Like Black folks, we just want to live and love outside in public without the threat of criminalization, right? Just be able to laugh outside without being harassed by the
Yeah.
cops. Be
Right.
groundbreaking. So yeah, I think that the potential here, the opportunity is a space where we all thrive and can heal together.
Just trying to breathe that statement in, because it feels very worthy and very, it shouldn't be a stretch, but it feels like what I believe in. And I really appreciate you putting your words to that beautiful, beautiful image, Will. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for sharing your work at Freedom Futures, and just so much encouragement and inspiration with me and our listeners today. Will, a lot of gratitude, a lot of respect for what you are doing in the world. And for our viewers, if you want to check out more about Freedom Futures, you can find them at freedomfutures.net. We'll put that in the chat. On their website, you can check out how to partner with Freedom Futures if you want to bring them into your organization, or learn more about how to align your giving with liberation. Doesn't that sound like a brilliant idea? You can also get in touch with Freedom Futures using the email inquiry, INQUIRY, inquiry at freedomfutures.net. Well, sorry, did I cut you off? Are you going to say something? No. Okay.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. And shameless plug on the Camelback Ventures side, if you are interested in more on this topic of governance and legacy, hot news off the press, come follow us at Camelback Ventures, because we're creating a cohort to develop what we're calling metamorphic legacy. Come find us, camelbackventures.org, or on social media, where over the coming months we will be sharing more about this cohort. It's intended for trustees to develop what we're calling metamorphic legacy, which we define as a beautiful, wise, intelligent form of stewardship that knows its history, feels the present weight of opportunity, and courageously faces a future it won't control. If you're intrigued, please join us. But that, I'm afraid, is all we have for today. My huge thanks again to you, Will, for being here, sharing, and
pleasure.
just, yeah, everything you're doing in the world too. And
thank you. Likewise, thank you for having me, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Will. And we would also just love to say thank you all for being here and sharing this conversation with us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.